At Thanksgiving dinner, my mother made 25 relatives vote on whether I should be erased from the family. But before we get into my story, tell me what time you're watching this and from which city, so I know how far my story has traveled. If you've ever been made the problem in a room where everyone already chose a side, stay with me. And if this story feels familiar, subscribe before we open that briefcase. I'm Meredith, a 28-year-old financial auditor. The tense dinner took place at our family's sprawling apple farm. My mother stood at the head of the long dining table, right beneath the portraits of my late grandparents. "We have carried Meredith long enough," she declared, looking directly at everyone. "We are done carrying your dead weight." I sat perfectly still, my face entirely blank. She demanded that everyone raise a hand if they agreed to exile me from the family and permanently strip my rights to my grandfather's trust fund. Slowly, hands went up. My aunt, my uncle, 2 cousins. Finally, even my own brother. Seeing 25 hands raised against me, I knew they had meticulously planned this ambush behind my back. I calmly pushed my chair back, ready to walk away and never return. But as I reached the hallway, the heavy front door swung open. It was my grandfather's trust lawyer, holding a combination-locked briefcase. The color instantly drained from my mother's face. He dropped the heavy steel briefcase onto the center of the dining table. "Before anyone erases Meredith, you need to know exactly what your grandfather protected her from." A few days before Thanksgiving, the first warning came through my work email. I was sitting at my cramped desk in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where I work as a housing intake coordinator for a busy nonprofit legal aid office. I am not an attorney, but my entire day revolves around scrutinizing dense legal documents, verifying tenant rights, and spotting discrepancies in eviction notices. Because of this daily grind, my eyes are naturally trained to catch when something feels legally off. So, when an unexpected message popped up in my inbox from Warren Blake, the longtime attorney handling my late grandfather's estate, my immediate instinct was suspicion. The subject line simply read, "Urgent inquiry regarding the Mercer Family Trust." In the brief email, Warren formally requested to verify my current residential address. He stated there was a serious complication with the trust and explicitly mentioned that he wanted me to be aware of an old, overlooked legal file that directly pertained to my future. This completely contradicted everything I had been told. For years, my mother, Elaine, had aggressively maintained that the entire estate was permanently settled. According to her narrative, I had already received my fair share of the inheritance long ago, and I possessed absolutely no legal right to ask any further questions. I had just placed my fingers on the keyboard to type out a response when my cell phone vibrated against the desk. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. I answered, and Elaine's voice flowed through the speaker, deceptively calm, yet laced with that familiar, suffocating control. "I know Warren Blake reached out to you," she began smoothly, not bothering to explain how she knew. "Do not reply to him. Warren is a bitter man who enjoys digging up buried family history. We need complete family unity this Thanksgiving, Meredith. If you stir up unnecessary drama, everyone will finally see exactly how selfish and disruptive you truly are." As she abruptly ended the call, I sat in the quiet office, overwhelmed by the exhausting reality of my mother's decade-long smear campaign. Elaine had meticulously convinced our relatives that I had selfishly taken a massive trust payout and run away. The truth was drastically different. I had been entirely financially independent since the day I turned 19. I had never received any large inheritance check, nor had I ever asked for one. Yet whenever I attempted to defend my character, Elaine would immediately cut me off, loudly accusing me of rewriting history to play the victim. The isolation within my own bloodline was profound. My own brother, Peter, hadn't bothered to call me to ask how I was doing. My younger cousin, Kelsey, had only sent a passive-aggressive text message earlier that morning reading, "Please don't upset Mom this year." They had all blindly accepted Elaine's version of reality. Despite the anxiety twisting in my stomach, I knew I still had to attend the holiday dinner at the farm. If I stayed away, Elaine would effortlessly weaponize my absence, using it as undeniable proof of my supposed guilt, instability, and lack of loyalty. Taking a deep breath, I turned my attention back to my glowing computer monitor. I scrolled down to review Warren's message one more time. That was when I noticed a final, isolated sentence positioned at the very bottom of the email, written in bold text. Do not sign anything at Thanksgiving without reading it first. By Thursday afternoon, Mercer Apple Farm looked less like a holiday home and more like a place waiting for a verdict. I drove up the long gravel driveway. The sprawling Pennsylvania property was stark in the late November chill, the apple trees completely stripped of leaves. The old wooden barn was neatly strung with white holiday lights, and through the large bay windows of the main house, I could already see the massive oak dining table prepared for the guests. Stepping inside, I immediately noticed the framed portraits of Grandpa Harold and Grandma Joan hanging near the main staircase. Looking at their faces, a brief memory surfaced. Grandpa Harold used to let me sit on his lap to steer the rusted green tractor across the fields. Grandma Joan had secretly left her handwritten apple pie recipe exclusively to me. They were the only two people who had ever made me feel like I genuinely had a place in this family. Now that they were gone, the massive house felt entirely different, cold, rigid, and deeply unwelcoming. My older brother, Peter, opened the heavy front door for me. His posture was unusually stiff, offering no hug of welcome. Inside the living room, my younger cousin, Kelsey, immediately looked down at her shoes, actively avoiding my eye contact. Aunt Denise stepped forward and gave me a rigid, one-armed half-hug. I'm glad you came, considering everything, she whispered, her tone completely devoid of warmth. Cousin Brian didn't even bother to say hello. He just leaned against the wall, looking me up and down with harsh, evaluating judgment. Across the room, Uncle Vernon was speaking in hushed, serious tones with my mother, Elaine. They abruptly stopped talking the exact second I stepped fully into the room. Wanting to escape the heavy tension, I walked toward the kitchen to get a glass of water. Pausing in the hallway, I overheard Aunt Denise muttering to someone over the stove. Some people take their advance and still come back for pie, she remarked bitterly. I frowned deeply, having absolutely no idea what the strange word advance meant in this twisted context. In the dining room, my eyes landed on a thick red folder resting on a side table. The printed white label on the cover clearly read, Meredith Lawson, Advanced Distribution Record. Before I could step closer to examine the document, Elaine appeared out of nowhere. She swiftly grabbed the folder and flipped it face down, her expression aggressively tight. A moment later, Kelsey pulled me aside into the narrow pantry. Please don't make Mom do this in front of everyone, my cousin whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Do what? I asked, genuinely confused. Kelsey refused to answer the direct question, shaking her head as she looked away. Aunt Elaine has been sick over this for weeks, she mumbled. I stared at Kelsey, a cold realization settling deep in my chest. Every single person in this house knew a massive secret that I didn't. Walking back toward the main foyer, I suddenly froze in my tracks. From around the corner, I clearly heard Uncle Vernon speaking firmly to Elaine. Once they vote, she can't come back later and claim she was blindsided. I stood completely still in the shadows of the hallway. The final pieces of the puzzle violently clicked together. This Thanksgiving wasn't a holiday meal at all. It was a carefully orchestrated trap designed specifically for me. Dinner moved like a normal holiday meal until my mother stood up with the red folder. For the first hour, everyone forced painful small talk about the local weather and sports. Peter sat directly across from me, nervously drinking glass after glass of ice water. Kelsey barely touched her food, just pushing mashed potatoes around her porcelain plate in total silence. Meanwhile, Elaine played the flawless host, serving sliced turkey and pouring wine with a terrifyingly calm smile, acting as if the crushing tension didn't exist. As soon as the main plates were cleared, the illusion shattered. Elaine gently placed her manicured hand on the thick red folder. Before we serve dessert, we need to handle an administrative matter for the future of Mercer Apple Farm, she announced, her voice echoing off the walls. She opened the cover and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Looking directly at me, she coldly declared that I had requested and received exactly $96,000 from the Mercer Family Trust when I was 19 years old. She called it an advance distribution. According to her twisted narrative, because I took my inheritance early and walked away from the family, I had selfishly forced Kelsey and the other members to suffer a massive financial loss. That is an absolute lie, I fired back, my voice shaking with pure adrenaline. I never received a single dime of that $96,000. I never requested it, and I certainly never signed any transfer papers. I worked 3 separate jobs to pay for my own apartment rent, my used car, and every single cent of my college tuition. I have been completely financially independent since the day I moved out. You have the nerve to sit here and accuse me of draining the trust? Elaine didn't even flinch. She simply looked at the rest of the table and shook her head in mock pity. This is exactly why we need witnesses, she said smoothly. She denies anything that makes her look responsible. Uncle Vernon aggressively tapped his knuckles on the oak table. The Family Advisory Committee needs a finalized record to move forward, he chimed in. Aunt Denise let out a dramatic sigh, wiping her eyes. Elaine has suffered and carried this financial burden for way too long. Cousin Brian glared at me, his eyes filled with disgust, looking at me like a greedy thief who had stolen his money. Next to him, my brother, Peter, remained completely silent, cowardly staring down at his empty plate. Kelsey began to cry softly, tears streaming down her cheeks, but she kept her mouth firmly shut, utterly refusing to tell the truth. Elaine slid a crisp, legally bound document onto the center of the table. The bold heading read, Family Resolution to Remove Meredith Lawson from Mercer Family Decisions. She quickly recited the harsh demands. I would be permanently barred from attending any future trust meetings. I would formally surrender all future inheritance rights. Finally, I would be strictly prohibited from attending gatherings at Mercer Apple Farm unless I received an explicit written invitation. The document demanded my signature, essentially forcing me to legally confess that I had received the massive payout. Staring at the paper, Warren's urgent email warning flashed vividly in my mind. Do not sign anything at Thanksgiving without reading it first. I braced myself, fully expecting her to slide a pen across the table and demand my signature right then. But Elaine didn't ask me to sign it. Instead, she slowly turned her calculating gaze away from me, looking toward the relatives surrounding the long table. Then we'll vote, Elaine declared, her voice dripping with absolute authority. Let the family decide whether Meredith still belongs here. The room did not argue. It obeyed. Not a single person immediately opposed Elaine's outrageous, baseless demand. I looked around the massive oak table, desperately waiting for just one person to speak up and say, "This is completely wrong." Instead, there was only a suffocating, cowardly silence. Then, Aunt Denise slowly raised her right hand into the air. Uncle Vernon raised his hand right after her, his face completely blank and unapologetic. Cousin Brian raised his hand next, deliberately looking at the far wall to avoid making eye contact with me. One by one, the rest of the relatives followed suit, lifting their hands in silent, cowardly agreement. I stood perfectly still, absorbing the profound, sickening emotional hit. These were the exact same people I used to help without a second of hesitation. These were the relatives who had happily eaten warm, free dinners at my cramped apartment when they were struggling financially. These were the family members who constantly called my phone late at night when they desperately needed help filling out confusing health insurance forms, complicated lease agreements, and endless stacks of legal paperwork. They had gladly taken my time, my energy, and my empathy. Now, they were effortlessly voting to erase my existence. My younger sister, Kelsey, was one of the last holdouts. Heavy tears streamed down her flushed cheeks as she finally looked at me. "I'm sorry," Kelsey whispered, her voice cracking under the crushing pressure of the room. "I don't know what else to do." Shaking and sobbing, my sister raised her trembling hand into the air. My father, Peter, was the very last one. He had been staring down at his empty plate the entire time. Elaine looked down the long length of the table and coldly called his name. "Peter?" she demanded sharply. My father flinched. I stared at him, my heart pounding violently against my ribs. I waited, desperately praying that my own father would ask at least one question in my defense, or demand to see actual proof of this supposed payout. Instead, Peter looked down at the tablecloth and slowly raised his hand. Elaine didn't even smile. She simply nodded, satisfied with her absolute control over the family. "That is all 25 members," she declared officially. "The vote is unanimous. Meredith is permanently removed from all family decisions. As of tonight, you are no longer considered a part of the Mercer legacy." I didn't scream. I didn't throw a useless fit or beg them to reconsider their betrayal. Staring at the sea of raised hands, I finally understood the devastating truth. This entire room had made their decision long before I even arrived at the farm. I quietly pushed my chair back, stood up straight, and grabbed my heavy winter coat from the back of the chair. Elaine scoffed loudly. "Don't make this dramatic, Meredith. Just leave with whatever dignity you have left." I didn't bother responding to her cruelty. I turned my back on the dining room and walked straight toward the foyer. But right before my fingers could even touch the brass doorknob, the loud, sharp chime of the doorbell echoed through the silent house. Not a single person at the table stood up to answer it. I glanced back and saw Elaine staring directly at the front door, her face suddenly hardening into pale, rigid panic. Next to her, Peter stared at his wife, his eyes widening as he realized she already knew exactly who was standing outside in the cold. The front door opened before anyone at the table moved. Warren Blake stepped into the foyer, brushing a light dusting of snow off the shoulders of his dark wool coat. In his right hand, he carried an old, scuffed leather briefcase secured with a heavy brass combination lock. His weathered face remained entirely calm and unhurried, showing zero intimidation. I instantly recognized his imposing name from the work email I had received days ago. Elaine immediately stood up, her polite, flawless mask completely slipping off her face. "Warren, you were definitely not invited here," she snapped sharply, her voice trembling with rage. "This is a private family matter." Warren walked straight past me and into the dining room. "When a hostile family vote directly involves the Mercer family trust, Elaine, it permanently ceases to be a private matter," he replied smoothly. He placed the heavy leather briefcase directly onto the center of the oak dining table, perfectly wedging it between Elaine's deceptive red folder and the half-eaten Thanksgiving plates. He looked around the stunned, silent room and spoke with booming clarity. "The illegal vote you all just held triggered Clause 17B. A visible wave of pure confusion washed over the seated relatives. Warren calmly explained the truth. Grandpa Harold Mercer had secretly added a strict, binding addendum to the trust shortly after Grandma Joan passed away. Harold had accurately predicted that Elaine might eventually weaponize immense family pressure to maliciously isolate Meredith. Therefore, the legal clause dictated that if any family resolution ever attempted to wrongfully remove Meredith from her rightful trust benefits or banish her from Mercer Apple Farm, the estate lawyer was immediately authorized to open a protective file. Furthermore, the current trustee, Elaine, was now automatically and temporarily suspended pending a full forensic accounting audit. "This is absolute nonsense," Elaine forcefully interrupted, her voice shrill with rising, uncontrollable panic. My father was losing his mind at the very end. Warren completely ignored her desperate outburst. He spun the brass combination lock. It clicked loudly. He flipped open the briefcase, revealing a mountain of meticulously organized, stamped legal documents. He pulled them out one by one. There was the original Mercer Family Trust, the official, notarized addendum for Clause 17B. A sealed, handwritten letter from Harold addressed specifically to me. Another personal letter from Grandma Joan that I had never been allowed to receive. A typed transcript of Harold's final, verified legal instructions. Then Warren pulled out the exact same advanced distribution file Elaine had just falsely quoted. He laid it flat on the table, pointing directly to a forged signature that was supposed to be mine. Right next to it, he placed my verified hospital medical records from that exact date, undeniably proving I was physically incapacitated and could not have possibly signed anything. Furthermore, Warren continued, raising his steady voice slightly to easily drown out Elaine's frantic, defensive sputtering. I brought sworn, legally binding affidavits from Owen Reed, the independent witness who verified the trust addendum. Owen confirmed under oath that Harold signed these crucial documents while in perfect sound mind, completely blocking any desperate medical disputes you might attempt to raise today. Warren reached deep into the bottom of the battered briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of highlighted official bank statements. He spread them out across the white tablecloth for everyone to clearly see. As for the missing $96,000, Warren stated coldly, looking directly into my mother's terrified eyes, I thoroughly traced the wire transfers. The stolen funds never went into Meredith's personal checking account. The money was quietly routed through an obscure trust disbursement account, and within 48 hours, it was entirely transferred into a completely different destination. The room was so completely quiet that I could clearly hear the cold winter wind howling outside the barn. Warren picked up the final, brightly highlighted bank statement, placed it deliberately in front of my father, and delivered the fatal, undeniable blow. The account that received the stolen trust money was registered directly to Elaine Lawson Catering. Instantly, 25 heads snapped around, and the entire room stared in horrified, breathless silence at Elaine. For the first time that night, nobody was looking at me. Every single eye in the massive dining room had instantly snapped toward Elaine. My mother desperately tried to maintain her perfect composure, but her face was visibly pale and drawn. I did it to save the farm, she stammered, her voice completely losing its commanding, authoritative edge. I was under immense financial pressure after your grandpa Harold died. Meredith, you have absolutely no idea about the incredible sacrifices I made just to keep this family afloat. Warren Blake didn't entertain her desperate emotional manipulation for a second. He simply tapped the stack of legal documents. You had zero legal authority to request an advance distribution under Meredith's name. If that signature is indeed forged, the entire trust must be subjected to a full forensic audit, Warren stated coldly, staring her down. And as of this exact moment, you are officially suspended as trustee under Clause 17B. While Elaine frantically sputtered, trying to defend herself, Kelsey slowly reached out and picked up one of the highlighted bank statements. My younger sister's eyes scanned the transaction lines, her face instantly draining of all color. She looked up, her voice trembling with absolute heartbreaking horror. Mom, did you buy my townhouse with money you put under Meredith's name? Elaine opened her mouth to speak, but she couldn't form a single coherent word, utterly refusing to answer the direct question in front of everyone. The heavy, suffocating silence was finally broken by my father. Peter stared down at his trembling hands, his voice barely a quiet whisper. I saw some strange paperwork a few years ago, he confessed quietly, avoiding my gaze. Elaine told me that Meredith had voluntarily agreed to all of it. I didn't want to tear the family apart over money, so I chose not to ask any more questions. I looked at my father, and a sickening, heartbreaking realization washed over me. He hadn't been completely fooled by her lies. He just willfully chose his own comfortable peace over protecting his own daughter. He let me take the painful blame for a decade just to avoid an uncomfortable, explosive argument with his wife. Panic began to spread like a devastating wildfire around the massive table. Aunt Denise abruptly stood up, her face flushed with genuine terror. I signed as a witness for a document you prepared, Elaine. I swear I didn't know it was fraudulent. Warren flipped a page on his legal notepad and looked directly at Uncle Vernon. And I have an email from you, Vernon, explicitly urging Elaine to get the vote done before Blake resurfaces. Uncle Vernon sank back into his oak chair, completely speechless and defeated. Cousin Brian awkwardly cleared his throat, looking at me with pathetic, desperate regret. Meredith, I'm so incredibly sorry. I really had no idea. Stop! I cut him off sharply, refusing to hear it. His weak apology was a full decade too late to matter. Warren turned to me, his stern tone softening for the very first time tonight. Meredith, as a rightful beneficiary, do you wish to stay here at Mercer Apple Farm for the night? I looked around the chaotic dining room. I looked at the 25 relatives who had just eagerly voted to erase me from existence without a second thought. None of these cowardly, self-serving people deserve the power to decide whether I stayed or left. No, I replied, my voice steady and completely resolute. I want the record to show I left by choice. Without accepting a single fake apology, I turned my back on them and walked out the door into the cold night. The legal fallout did not happen in one dramatic night. In the real world, the pursuit of justice is a slow, methodical, and exhausting process. Warren Blake didn't have Elaine arrested in handcuffs at the dinner table. Instead, the explosive files were formally handed over to a specialized civil trust litigation lawyer, an independent forensic accountant, and the county probate court. Elaine was immediately and officially stripped of her trustee powers, replaced by a court-appointed temporary fiduciary to manage the Mercer family trust. The forensic accountant quickly uncovered a horrifying, decade-long web of financial abuse. Dozens of trust disbursements lacked proper documentation. The $96,000 legally attached to my name had been meticulously funneled to save Elaine Lawson Catering from total bankruptcy, with a significant chunk secretly diverted to pay the hefty down payment on Kelsey's brand-new townhouse. I filed a relentless, uncompromising civil claim against my mother. Elaine's panicked defense attorney repeatedly begged for private mediation, hoping to settle the embarrassing dispute quietly behind closed doors. I absolutely refused to meet her in person, demanding that all communication go strictly through my litigation lawyer. The final, legally binding settlement was brutal but fair. Elaine was forced to repay the entire $96,000, along with covering a significant portion of my legal fees. She permanently lost her trustee status. To satisfy the crushing debt, she had to sell her luxury SUV, drain her retirement savings, and permanently liquidate Elaine Lawson Catering, firing her entire remaining staff in the process. Aunt Denise was forced to sign a humiliating corrective statement admitting perjury, while Uncle Vernon's damning email got him permanently legally banished from the Family Advisory Committee. My younger sister, Kelsey, flooded my phone with desperate, tearful apology texts, begging for a chance to explain herself. I never replied. I refused to offer her any easy reconciliation. Kelsey now had to wake up every single morning inside a house she fully knew was bought with stolen money, placed fraudulently under my name. My father, Peter, sent a long, cowardly letter begging me to meet him for coffee so he could explain his side of the story. I sent him a single, definitive email in response. You raised your hand. I believe you. Then, I blocked his email address forever. I didn't dramatically change my last name. Dealing with the bureaucratic paperwork wasn't worth the headache. I simply left the toxic family group chat, blocked Elaine's phone number across all my devices, and quietly accepted that I would never set foot on Mercer Apple Farm again for the rest of my life. When the recovered trust funds finally cleared into my bank account, I used a significant portion of it to comfortably stabilize my own life and pay off my remaining student loans. With the remaining money, I established a small, dedicated legal aid fund specifically designed to help young adults who were being financially exploited and legally trapped by their own toxic relatives. I didn't feel any triumphant gloating, nor did I feel any societal pressure to offer them fake, forced forgiveness. I simply understood that completely severing the bloodline was my absolute only path to genuine self-preservation. If this entire nightmare has taught me anything, it is this. Your family does not get to hold a rigged vote to determine your fundamental worth as a human being. The people who choose to sit in absolute silence while you are being actively destroyed have already boldly chosen a side. A desperate, belated apology does not magically erase a hand raised against you in your darkest moment. The brutal truth can successfully restore your stolen dignity, but setting permanent, ironclad boundaries is the only thing that will secure your long-term peace. I was not erased by my family. I confidently chose to walk out. And for the very first time in my life, absolutely no one in that room has the power to call me back. Thank you so much for listening to my story all the way to the very end. I truly appreciate your constant support. I want to hear from you in the comments down below. If you were in my exact shoes, Would you have cut ties completely? Would you have ever given a father like Peter or a sister like Kelsey a second chance? Have you ever been made the ultimate problem in your own family? Let me know your thoughts, and I'll see you in the next one.